Welcome back to r/JustNoHOA, where people share stories about their crazy homeowner associations that make us feel better about not living in an HOA. And in case you are new around here, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel to join our awesome community. Without any further ado, let's dive right into the stories. The first one is titled, HOA developer tried to scam us for $73 million. We sued them for $34 million and won. For anonymity's sake, the following story was anonymized in regards to locations, names and dates. The story starts like this. When Andrew North Spring moved to the Ice Spring development in Fresno, California in 2006, he says he quickly realized it was one of the biggest mistakes of his life. This was the first time the 85-year-old had ever lived inside a homeowners association. However, he had heard a lot of horror stories before. Living in an HOA can be awful for residents. It can either be heaven or hell, North Spring said. He is a retired economist and he said the fee he was required to pay was a capitalist's perfect dream of a business. People must join, whether they like it or not, and they pay all the expenses of the business. North Spring is among more than 5,000 members of the 55+ community locked in a class action lawsuit since 2017 against Ice Spring developer Worldwide Properties, which they allege improperly collected HOA fees. On November 4th, 2020, Judge George Crustholt awarded the residents $34.8 million. That is the biggest award I've ever heard of, said Emily Jones, president of the National Homeowners Advocate Group. Based in Texas, Jones' organization specializes in helping people fight HOAs and lobbies for homeowner protections. We get calls from all over the country, but no one has ever reported to us a win as large as Ice Spring. Experts agree that fighting HOAs is hard for residents and big wins are even rarer. In California, HOAs govern more than 44% of the population, according to research by analysts at iProperty Management. With fees that can reach into the thousands of dollars from an estimated 3.5 million homes in the state, HOAs can make lawsuits long and costly for residents. Their goal is to bleed owners dry, said Jan Bergman, president of Cyber Citizens for Justice, a homeowners advocacy group based in D-Land. They will hit you with motion after motion, tie it up for years, and HOAs are famous for limiting what signs can go up in yards, raising free speech issues. They sometimes even ban basketball goals or other sports equipment from yards or even tell residents how many cars they can have. A California HOA was accused this month of threatening a family with a $100 a day fine for putting up Christmas lights too early. Worldwide Properties, which was purchased by homebuilder Taylor Morrison in 2018, developed Ice Spring and other communities in Fresno in the early 2000s. Worldwide also built amenities such as pools and clubhouses. When the time came to turn management of the community over to the Fresno Community Development District, Worldwide wanted to sell them to the community for $73 million. But there was a problem. A certified appraiser said the amenities were only worth about a quarter of that. I was immediately against it. It was the most stupid thing in the world, North Spring said. Worldwide based its number on the future value of a roughly $86 a month club fee they were charging, said attorney Tucker Bergson, who represented the residents. That fee, the lawsuit alleged, was illegal. Residents could not opt out of it and could even have their homes foreclosed upon for non-payment. Taylor Morrison, who has handled the defense in this case since acquiring Worldwide, did not return requests for comments on this story. Anderson said the $34 million figure is only the beginning. He estimates another $27 million in prejudgment interest and at least $4 million in fees collected this year that were not added to the ruling. There will also be, Anderson estimates, $5 million to $10 million in attorney fees for the two firms that represented the residents. The case was taken on a contingency with no retainer from the residents, which means it was a gamble for the lawyers who fought for it. Berkman says it is rare to find attorneys who will take such a complicated case without some assurance of payment. Unfortunately, wins such as Ice Spring would be very common if the owners had the money, he said. Berkman says he has spoken to attorneys who won thousands of dollars just to get building documents residents should be able to see anyway. And who just has that, he said. Jones said another problem is that residents face harassment for speaking up, which she says happens when residents don't act together. You cannot have one or two people taking the brunt of everything, she said. For Jones, much of the problem is a lack of government oversight. She says many HOA board members cling to their power, even when we have rules about elections, they still won't hold to them, she said. If you cannot get rid of them, that is the main problem. Jones got started fighting homeowners associations in the 1990s when she lost her Texas home for non-payment of HOA fees. They take advantage of foreclosures, which is why they should be regulated. Although Anderson says the Ice Spring case is likely to be appealed by the developer, Berkman said wins such as Ice Spring are important because they can create a domino effect leading to more victories for homeowners around the state. Homeowners have rights, but they are often not being enforced, he said. HOAs don't want decisions coming down for homeowners. The win gives hope to people such as Slade Chalbian, a resident of the Balago community in Fresno, also built by Worldwide. Chalbian, or Calbian, I'm not sure, has been a plaintiff in a class action lawsuit for the same activity that led to the Ice Spring lawsuit since 2019. This was great news in the fight to stop this sort of action, Chalbian wrote in an email. This makes me believe we can win this action in court. For Chalbian, winning would mean an end to the fee he has been challenging. Defeat is the status quo, which he said is paying the developer a mandatory for-profit fee forever. That is not fair. And by the way, Ripe Stars, this story was sent to me via email, aka submitted by user Michael Clark, and I very much appreciate if you guys send me interesting stories like this, especially when it is about HOAs. And I think there was a very important point made in this story where the attorney said that wins such as this one would be more common if the homeowners had more money. It's essentially often a David versus Goliath fight, although it does not have to be if the homeowners would bond together and fight for justice, so to say, as a group. In addition, I have to admit what really shocked me was the 44% numbers, meaning that over 44% of houses in California are essentially governed by an HOA, or rather are part of an HOA community. That almost sounds like a minefield if you ask me. If you have ever lived in an HOA or maybe are thinking about buying a home in an HOA community, then please feel free to share your experiences with HOAs either in the comments or on r/ripe stories on Reddit. Thank you very much in advance. The next one was posted by user LoveBugHugs on our own subreddit r/ripe stories, and it is titled "We Are All Imperfect." Over my 36 years as an RN, I have encountered some of the most egotistical, arrogant, self-absorbed and abusive doctors who walk around with their noses jammed up in the stratosphere with delusions of grandeur, god complexes. The years I spent serving my fellow humans on hospital floors, I did for the love of my fellow mankind. Working in hospitals was more like a cross between a Greek tragedy and a Shakespeare comedy. I will try to entertain you with the tale of misfortune and woe about doctors gone wild. It's a bird, it's a plane. No, it's a flying file. On a hospital floor located somewhere on planet Earth is the tale of the Greek god Dr. Poopy Britches. Now, Dr. Poopy Britches was that extra special kind of Greek god. When he entered the hospital corridors, he expected all of his slaves to bow at his gracing us with his omniscient presence. In truth, everyone actually ran to hide from him in fear of catching his attention. It was my misfortune to be working this particular evening shift. In those days we worked a 12-hour shift but were expected to clock in an hour before for shift change report, and then also work after 12 hours giving end of shift reports. A very long 12-hour shift. The first thing I heard when I walked through the floor's doors was a panicked whisper, "He is here!" I instantly ran and hid and begged another nurse to let me see her copy of the evening shift scheduling, thinking I could get copies of my assigned patient load after taking report. In those days we would get 15 to 20 patients per RN, 10 to 12 for LPNs, and RNs are expected to oversee their assigned LPNs' patient loads. I was in the middle of receiving reports when the hospital walls started shaking, as if we were in a magnitude 9.9 earthquake and its epicenter was the nurses' station on our floor. "Get in here now! I want her standing before me in 5 seconds to explain herself to me, now!" Next thing I heard was a very panicked charge nurse desperately trying to push me into the entrance gates of hell. As I slowly slipped into the station's entrance, the charge nurse ran away in fear for her life. He, the devil in disguise, started in with screams of "Why?" and demands of "Explain why this mat was not hung at noon. Who the hell do you think you are? When I make an order, I expect it be followed. What the hell were you doing at noon that was more important than doing what I ordered you to do? Were you sleeping on the job?" Well, I made the fatal mistake of answering his last query with, "Yes, I was sleeping, but I will go get report from the patient's day shift nurse and find out for you." Dr. Poopy Bridges' face immediately turned a rather beautiful hue of crimson red, steam started shouting out of his ears, flames shot out of his mouth, when all of a sudden his head exploded. He slammed the patient's chart closed and hurled it at my head. I tried to duck out of the way, but the corner caught the side of my head, splitting it open. I could feel blood trickle down the side of my head. The chart hit the desk behind me and crashed to the floor with the papers that were once safely held inside splayed on the floor like confetti. "Clean up your mess and get out of my sight." The only apology I received was from the patient's nurse. I told the charge nurse that I was going to the ER to get stitched up and I would return when done. I asked her to apologize to my patient's nurses for having to stay over to cover me. My metamorphosis into becoming Frankenstein's wife had officially begun. Woohoo! The mystery of the string. I will share with you the story of Dr. Knows It All, a doctor just like most who has the unmitigated gall to claim, "I know it all." One shift I had a patient who was admitted with severe neurodeficits and idiopathic undiagnosed psychotic issues. My nursing assessment was that the neuro issues were valid, the problem of psychosis were for me questionable. When questioned when this feeling that strings were coming out of the patient's stomach and back started, the patient stated that they started shortly after coming home from surgery a couple weeks ago. I went through the patient's meds list and asked which ones were new. After being informed of the 4 new meds from that list, I suspected a med intolerance or med adverse reaction, so I phoned the pharmacy. After confirming my suspicions, I was informed one med was contraindicated with another, and a listed S by S of altered sensations in the abdominal regions was listed on the other 2 new meds. I pulled up my big girl britches, swallowed my fears, and called Dr. Knows It All. After a thorough chewing out and being informal, "I didn't know what the hell I was talking about," he ended his call. About an hour later, Dr. Knows It All and the chief of staff were standing right in front of my nursing desk. Dr. Knows It All demanded that I repeat the total BS you tried to feed me on the phone. I dare you. The charge nurse ran up to me to ask what was going on, and Dr. Knows It All told her, "I was a fake nurse with a Cracker Jack's nursing license." Charge nurse sighed, shook her head and said, "Let's hear about it." I repeated my assessment findings as well as the notes I documented from the pharmacy phone call. Chief of staff then called the pharmacist and spoke for what felt like an eternity. After he hung up, he told me to carry on and then asked the charge nurse and Dr. Knows It All to follow him. Several hours later, charge nurse came to me and privately informed me that Dr. Knows-It-All had been put on 1-week suspension with orders to take a refresher course on pharmacology. Why couldn't they suspend Dr. Poopy Bridges? Oh, I forgot, he thinks he is a god. Weeks later, I had to call Dr. Knows-It-All in the middle of the night about a patient of his. After the end of shift, the floor nurse, one step up from charge nurse, called me into her office to ask why I claimed to Dr. Knows-It-All that I was the night's charge nurse. I explained that when he asked me who the charge nurse was, I said, Sam was the charge nurse. She said he is claiming that I said that I am the charge nurse. There you go, my dear readers, doctors can also lie. The importance of BMs. Dr. Knows-It-All's twin brother, Dr. I Never Make Mistakes, was quite the colorful character. Nurses who were assigned patients of his would always try to exchange patients with another nurse as they do with Dr. Poopy Bridges' patients. You, my dear readers, need to understand a few things about me. I am the eternal magnet for anyone crazy, stupid, entitled, or narcissistic, and I have 4 targets on all of my quadrants. This particular patient was sent home by Dr. I Never Make Mistakes with generous pain coverage, emphasis on generous, but let me interject a few things here. Number 1, one side effect of narcotics is constipation. Number 2, another side effect of long-term use of narcotics is the need to increase the dosages because of the body systems becoming desensitized to the narcotics. Number 3, see numbers 1 and 2. Well, this particular patient presents to the ER with numbness, tingling, and pins and needles to lower extremities, painful lower abdomen, and constant dizziness and nausea. Dr. I Never Make Mistakes admits the patient to my floor, neuro/ICU for workup for a possible spinal decompression. I was assigned this patient and started my admissions assessment. When asked when last BM occurred, patient responded with, "The day I was discharged after surgery 3 weeks ago." I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and went through my mind the possible outcomes of the phone call I was about to make. I wondered if it was possible for someone to murder me over the phone. Can my eardrum explode from the screaming? Was I about to die? I swallowed my fears, chose to go black and deal with my emotions when it was safe to do so, and finished the patient's assessment. I dialed Dr. I Never Make Mistakes number and quietly waited for my demise. After explaining to the dear doctor that my assessment of this particular patient was that high doses of narcotics were ingested for far too long and now the patient was severely impacted, not having had a BM since the last discharge, and the patient would need overt assistance with unloading intestines. After screaming at me for over 5 minutes for my stupidity and incompetent nursing skills, he slammed the phone to hang up. I sat at my desk and pondered how I wanted my funeral to go, what I wanted in my epitaph and on my headstone. I figured that I was then a well and truly dead nurse walking. After a while, Dr. I Never Make Mistakes showed up on floor and handed me the patient in question's chart. If looks could kill, I swear, dear readers, I would have dropped dead right then and there.
I will teach you just how incompetent you really are, then report this to the hospital's DON, that you are pretending to be a doctor by trying to tell me what you think is wrong with my patients, then we will see who is right.
Turned out Dr. I Never Make Mistakes ordered a Triple H, an enema that is high, hot, and hell of a lot of X3, and a special mom in the PM. And apparently, guys, special mom means milk of magnesia with cascara in the PM for a BM in the AM. And by the way, Ripe Stars, just a quick note to everybody that is writing stories for me. I very much appreciate that you write the stories, but please refrain from using too many abbreviations because it can be quite difficult to understand. Well, my dear readers, I won't spare you the details. After I hung the third of the Triple H and explained to the poor patient to hold it as long as possible, I set the patient on a neuro-commode lift and explained how to call for help and gave some magazines to rifle through to spend the time on the throne. I left the patient to get at it in privacy. After a while, I received that call for help. As I turned the corner into the patient's room, what I witnessed was worse than the 1815 Mount Tambora eruption on Sumbawa. The brown lumpy lava had flowed from under the room's bathroom door all the way under the bed to the far end of the wall and was beyond any BM I have ever witnessed up to the writing of this piece. Cleanup took 4 people to help me completely get this poor patient's room clean enough to get the patient back to the bed. I felt so sorry for having to call housekeeping to sterilize the floor, wall and bathroom. It truly was a scene out of a horror movie, instead it was watery lumpy BM and not blood. I felt like I was sending that poor housekeeper to her doom. The patient had another super duper pooper BM that next morning. All the complaints that patient presented to the ER were suddenly gone. Patient was then screaming for breakfast and coffee. 7 AM could not roll around quick enough for my liking. The look on Dr. I never make mistakes face was worth it all. Patient was discharged that day with orders for daily stool softeners and OTC pain meds, along with strict orders to call his office on the second day, no BM. However, back at you, Doctor, I never make mistakes. Did you hear about when the paramedics were called to a woman who was found laying on the side of the road unconscious but with no external injuries noted? As the first paramedic started taking vitals, the others started feeling for broken bones or lumps on her head. Vitals were sketchy, but they could not find any other findings. So, as they prepared her for transport, the second paramedic told the first one, "I'm not sure about this, but I'm positive this patient is a nurse." The first paramedic replied, "How do you know? There is no ID of any form on or around her." The second then replied, "Well, her stomach is obviously empty, her bladder is definitely overfull, and her ass looks half chewed off with what looks like years on top of years of chewing. Chewing from doctors, patients, and entitled patients' family members." And this, my dear readers, is only a drop in the mighty vast oceans of the life of a nurse. God bless and be well. And wow, Mrs. Lovebug Hugs, that was one of the most incredible stories I've ever read here on Reddit. Thank you so much for writing this. This was super entertaining, but also incredibly reassuring that being a nurse is probably one of the most stressful jobs you can have. Not gonna lie, I would definitely not be able to handle this. The amount of entitled and especially arrogant people you deal with on a daily basis would be way too much for me. I probably dislike arrogant people even more than entitled ones. And ripe stars, with this we have reached the end of the video. However, if you still cannot get enough of my content, then I would highly suggest to check out my endless binge watch playlist, which will soon show up in the left corner of the screen. In addition, I would really appreciate it if you could not only subscribe to the channel, but also turn on the bell notifications, which you can do by clicking on the little bell icon right next to the subscribe button. This will help my channel tremendously, and this will make sure that you don't miss any of my videos. Furthermore, if you want to see additional ripe content that I don't post on YouTube, then I would suggest to head on over to patreon.com/ripeyoutube for more than 50 exclusive videos that you will not see anywhere else. Thank you so much for your amazing daily support, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.